I want to start by saying that I am speaking on behalf of a collaboration, and although my emphasis in this talk won't be on health, the collaboration is led by Ekwendeni Hospital in northern Malawi, with involvement of Bunda College of Agriculture. Myself, I'm from the University of Western Ontario in Canada, and we've also had involvement of crop ecologists from Michigan State University, and we've had nutritionists from Canada involved in this project as well. It's a long-term project, so I really applauded Dr. Kalambira's point yesterday that this work takes a long time to have positive results. But in addition to my collaborators from the hospital and the different research institutions, the woman pictured here is another of the collaborators. Her name is Stelia Chisi, and she is a member of the farmer research team in Ekwendeni, and they have been really at the heart of the work that I'm to present to you today. And I'm going to tell the story backwards to some extent. I'm going to start with the punchline, and then I'm going to work through how we achieve these results, and then hopefully lead to some thinking about what it might mean for policy. So our last series of presenters were talking about evidence, and this is from a publication in Public Health Nutrition that we recently published, which shows that families who have been involved in our work for a longer period of time and compared to control households have improved child growth, both in terms of height for age and weight for height. And so this is a very exciting result. And you might say to yourself, well, what did you do to achieve these results? And coming back to some of the points that Todd Benson and others raised yesterday, the assumption that simply increasing yields will lead to increased income and improved nutrition doesn't hold true. We know already from plenty of evidence around the world that simply increasing the amount of food in the household is not necessarily going to lead to improvements in nutrition. So what strategy did we take? Well, we took what's sometimes called an agro-ecological approach to improving food security and nutrition. We started with some research that had actually been done by the Ministry of Agriculture back in the 90s alongside ICARSAT and Sept. And they had come up with a number of different options that smallholder farmers could use to improve soil fertility. So they were interested in improving soil fertility as a means to improve maize yields. And you can see from this chart that there were a range of options, some of which were better at improving nitrogen availability within the soil, and some of which might provide other options for farmers. And what we did is we had these basket of options available for farmers to test, and we used a participatory model. Farmers could choose which one they wanted to try out on their own farm and get a small amount of seed and some information about the legume intercrop, and then they could try it out on their own farm, and then we tried to examine whether we were seeing improvements in food security and nutrition. And I should add that it wasn't just growing one crop, but the reason it was agro-ecological in approach is because the legumes were being grown together, pigeon pea and groundnut, or pigeon pea and soybean, and then those legumes, after harvest, the residue was incorporated into the soil to improve the soil fertility, the soil quality. And we've shown evidence from this research that there are multiple benefits from this approach. Not only do you get increases in yield compared to just using fertilizer or just using a monocropping system, but you also improve the efficiency of fertilizer when you are applying it to your soil, because your soil is better able to retain nutrients and retain water, and it has greater strength in terms of soil erosion. But you also get other benefits from those legumes. You get a source of protein and oil for nutritional benefit. Sometimes you get, in the case of pigeon pea, a source of fuel wood. And you also cover the soil for a longer period of time, so you're protecting it from soil erosion in that way as well. So I mentioned that we took a participatory approach, but we also took an iterative approach. So as we were doing our research, we tried to check in with households on a regular basis to find out what was working and what wasn't working, and how we might change our strategy. And we learned some really key things early on about childcare and feeding practices, which someone mentioned yesterday, and that was the role of grandmothers. They were really critical in making decisions about what children were eating during those first 1,000 days. And we learned that some of their practices were beneficial and some of their practices were not beneficial. We learned that sometimes they were recommending getting watery porridge and different root waters, and some of those things, particularly the porridge, during the first 6 months of life, we found evidence that it was leading to poorer growth of those children. And so we developed what we called agriculture and nutrition discussion groups, where we brought together older men, older women, and younger women, and had small group discussions about some of these issues. And then we brought them together in a large group to have a facilitated dialogue around these issues to try to get at these more sensitive issues. But we also learned that gender issues were really critical with regards to trying to ensure that agricultural approaches lead to improvement of nutrition. So this is something you might see. I took this picture 2 years ago during the planting season. Women, of course, play a really critical role in doing agriculture in Malawi, which is not true for all of the world, which means that sometimes if you're increasing agricultural productivity, it might be taking women away from important practices which have impact on nutrition, such as frequent feeding of children or breastfeeding of children. And we learned that because we were asking for early incorporation of legume residue to improve soil fertility, this wasn't always happening because women were saying, well, yeah, I'm getting increased groundnut production, but my husband is taking those groundnuts and selling them, and he's using that money for beer, and so this project isn't benefiting me at all. And another problem we encountered was women were saying, well, yeah, I'm harvesting the pigeon pea and the groundnuts, but I have lots of other work to do in the home, and I don't have time to incorporate that residue. And so the farmer research team came up with some really interesting strategies to address some of these issues. In addition to the discussion groups where we raised some of these sensitive gender issues, they also started what were called crop residue incorporation days, where they went to the villages during the time of harvesting legumes and said to men, okay, we're going to have a crop residue incorporation day. This is your fertilizer. Let's bury it, man. This is your job. You should be doing this because this is going to enhance your yields in the long run. And so we went from, in 2000, having about 15% incorporation of crop residue to we were able to document a dramatic rise in the early incorporation of crop residue, both compared to over time and compared to control households who were in neighboring villages. So we're really excited about that effect because that has long-term sustainability implications for soils, for farmers to manage those soils over the long run. When you're thinking about things like climate change, if soils are better able to retain water, then you're going to have better outcomes during times of drought, for example. So we were able to document not only improvement in intake of legume consumption, so we showed evidence that children after 6 months were getting more intake of legumes, but we also saw increases in maize yield, even compared to just maize plus fertilizer. And so we see this as a good strategy, not only for improving food security, but also for addressing nutrition and for kind of long-term ability of farmers to address sustainability of their farming. So in conclusion, the key findings that we bring to bear on the discussion around linking agriculture to nutrition is we think it's important to not just focus on a few crops or inputs, but to think of a diversification, and we've heard about this from a number of the speakers today, so that farmers aren't reliant on 1 or 2 crops, but that they have a number of different strategies that they can draw on. And alongside that, it's really important to learn from and work with farmers in doing the research together so that you understand what are the constraints that they are working under and how can we adapt the technology and the approach we're using to try to address those constraints. So the approach of having an iterative and dialogue-based educational method to make impact in the communities where we're working. And so the process of building on research and then going back to communities to see what's working, we see as a really important strategy. And I would just like to thank the many supporters that we've had in our research. This is, we're in our 11th year of doing this research, and we're now focused on climate change adaptation, but we've had the privilege of having tremendous support from these different funding agencies listed here. Thank you.